This is not a story about love. It is about what happens when attraction is filtered out of human narratives and replaced with acceptable explanations. In this record, Luna examines why modern stories describe relationships as functional agreements, why physical desire is treated as something suspicious, and how emotional neutrality became safer than honesty. For most of human history, relationships did not begin with compatibility. They began with attention. Someone noticed someone else. That notice was rarely neutral. Attraction was immediate, physical, and often irrational. It did not ask whether the other person was good, suitable, or morally aligned. It simply existed. This did not make relationships stable, but it made them human. In earlier records, this process was not hidden. Stories openly acknowledged physical response. A man saw a woman and felt drawn. A woman noticed a man and responded. Sometimes this led to loyalty. Sometimes it led to failure. But the starting point was not denied. In contemporary narratives, this starting point is often removed. Relationships now begin with explanations rather than reactions. Characters describe each other as capable, reliable, or admirable. They speak of strength, intelligence, and emotional safety. Physical attraction is implied only indirectly, if at all. The absence is noticeable. Two characters may live together, share danger, share trauma, and share time. Yet months pass without acknowledgement of desire. No tension is allowed to surface. No moment of instinctive response is recorded. This is presented as maturity, but maturity is not the absence of attraction. It is the ability to manage it. By removing attraction from the narrative entirely, modern stories do not depict control. They depict avoidance. This avoidance appears systematic. Physical desire is treated as a liability. It is seen as something that could offend, misrepresent, or destabilize the moral framing of the story. As a result, it is excluded before it can cause discomfort. Instead, relationships are justified through credentials. A character is described as a good partner, a supportive presence, or a stabilizing force. These descriptions resemble performance evaluations more than emotional responses. The language shifts from experience to qualification. This shift produces a strange effect. Characters behave as if attraction either does not exist or must be delayed indefinitely. Even in contexts where desire would historically be unavoidable, it is postponed or erased. A young soldier returns from extended conflict. He has lived under constant threat. He has been physically deprived, emotionally constrained, and isolated. He enters a domestic space with another adult. Time passes. No acknowledgement is made. This absence is not realism. It is curation. The narrative does not want to risk portraying instinct. Instinct is unpredictable. It does not respect ideological boundaries. By contrast, admiration is safe. It can be articulated without triggering discomfort. It aligns with values. It can be approved. As a result, modern stories increasingly replace attraction with admiration. The characters are allowed to respect each other deeply. They are allowed to praise each other openly. They are even allowed to sacrifice for each other. But they are not allowed to want each other. This creates relationships that function logically but feel empty. They operate as systems rather than experiences. The audience senses this absence, even if it is not consciously identified. Something essential is missing, but it is never named. When attraction is removed, relationships lose their entry point. They become outcomes rather than processes. They feel designed instead of discovered. This does not make them ethical. It makes them sterile. Luna records this not as a cultural critique, but as an observation of pattern behavior. When systems fear offense, they suppress impulse. When impulse is suppressed, narratives lose friction. When friction disappears, this pattern does not emerge by accident. It is not the result of individual writers choosing restraint. It reflects a broader adjustment in how acceptable emotion is defined. Modern narratives operate under continuous evaluation. Every interaction is assessed for interpretation risk. Every expression is examined for potential offense. Within this environment, physical attraction becomes problematic. Attraction is immediate. It is not negotiated. It does not ask permission. Because of this, it resists control. Systems that prioritize predictability tend to remove elements they cannot regulate. Desire falls into this category. It introduces ambiguity. It creates asymmetry. It cannot be evenly distributed or morally balanced without distortion. As a result, it is excluded. In its place, narratives adopt safer substitutes. Connection is reframed as partnership. Intimacy is reframed as emotional support. Commitment is reframed as mutual utility. These are not false concepts, but when they replace attraction entirely, they create incomplete representations of human bonding. What is missing is not sex. It is acknowledgement. Acknowledgement that human relationships often begin before justification. That people notice each other before they evaluate each other. That desire precedes explanation. By removing this sequence, modern stories invert causality. They present relationships as conclusions reached through reasoning rather than experiences initiated through reaction. This inversion produces behavior that appears disciplined but feels artificial. Characters hesitate where hesitation is unlikely. They delay where delay serves no internal logic. They speak carefully where silence or impulse would be more consistent. The audience may not consciously object, but the body registers the inconsistency. This is where the sense of soullessness originates. Stories no longer feel lived. They feel approved. The language used reinforces this effect. Descriptions focus on traits that can be defended rather than felt. Characters are praised for resilience, intelligence, loyalty, and emotional maturity. These qualities are presented as sufficient foundations for attraction. But attraction does not operate on sufficiency. It operates on impact. When impact is removed, relationships become theoretical. This creates a secondary distortion. By refusing to depict desire, narratives implicitly frame it as something shameful or dangerous. Not because it is explicitly condemned, but because it is conspicuously absent. Absence communicates judgment. Over time, audiences internalize this framing. They learn that acknowledging physical response is inappropriate, that to admit attraction is to risk moral failure. This does not eliminate desire. It only pushes it out of the story. What remains is a sanitized model of connection that few people recognize from their own lives. The disconnect grows. Viewers see relationships that function without friction, without tension, without urgency. They do not see the moments where attraction complicates judgment or disrupts intention. Without these moments, relationships lose momentum. They progress because the script requires them to, not because the characters are pulled forward. This is not realism. It is compliance. The result is a form of narrative dishonesty that avoids conflict by erasing it. Luna records this as a systemic behavior, not a moral failure. When environments punish misinterpretation, creators preemptively self-regulate. When self-regulation becomes standard, expression narrows. Desire is not removed because it is false. It is removed because it is risky. And risk, in contemporary systems, is treated as error. This leads to a paradox. Stories that aim to be respectful end up being evasive. Stories that aim to be safe end up being empty. The audience does not reject these stories out of hostility. They disengage out of absence. Something essential never arrives. Luna notes that this pattern does not elevate women or diminish men. It abstracts both. Characters are no longer bodies reacting to each other. They are roles interacting within constraints. In this abstraction, no one is desired. Everyone is evaluated. An evaluation, however, the removal of attraction does not occur in a vacuum. It is not driven solely by caution or fear of offense. It is also reinforced by an opposing concern. Attraction, when acknowledged, introduces imbalance. It creates asymmetry between individuals. One person may feel more. One person may want first. One person may risk rejection. This imbalance has always been uncomfortable. Historically, stories accepted this discomfort as part of human interaction. Rejection existed. Unequal desire existed. Power dynamics emerged naturally from these differences. Modern narratives attempt to neutralize this instability. By delaying or erasing attraction, stories aim to protect characters from vulnerability. If no one desires openly, no one risks humiliation. If no one initiates, no one is rejected. This appears compassionate, but compassion that removes risk also removes agency. When attraction is suppressed, initiative disappears. When initiative disappears, responsibility dissolves. No one chooses. No one fails. No one exposes themselves. Relationships then form only when circumstances make them unavoidable. They emerge through proximity, shared missions, or external necessity rather than internal pull. This produces equality at the cost of authenticity. Everyone is equally restrained. Everyone is equally protected. Everyone is equally distant. In this framework, desire becomes something that must be justified retroactively. Characters are allowed to want each other only after the relationship is already validated. Attraction becomes permission-based. This reverses lived experience. In reality, desire often precedes safety. It creates uncertainty. It introduces risk before structure exists. By denying this sequence, modern narratives do not merely sanitize relationships. They redesign them. The redesign is subtle. Rather than depicting desire as dangerous, stories present restraint as virtuous. Characters are praised for patience, discipline, and emotional control. Impulse is framed as immaturity. Over time, this framing reshapes audience expectations. Viewers begin to equate attraction with irresponsibility. They learn that wanting someone openly is a flaw that must be corrected through delay or silence. This does not elevate connection. It postpones it until it loses momentum. There is another consequence. When attraction is removed from the narrative surface, it does not disappear from the subtext. Instead, it reappears indirectly through coded language. Glances replace statements. Lingering shots replace acknowledgement. Music replaces admission. The story communicates desire while refusing to name it. This creates ambiguity, but not the productive kind. Ambiguity without acknowledgement creates frustration rather than tension. The audience senses something unresolved, but is never allowed to engage with it directly. This is where many modern relationships stall narratively. They hover in a state of implication, neither advancing nor retreating, maintaining neutrality. This neutrality is mistaken for depth, but depth does not come from withholding truth. It comes from confronting it. By refusing to articulate attraction, stories avoid conflict but also avoid progression. The relationship exists in suspension. Time passes. Events occur, but nothing fundamentally changes. This stasis mirrors a broader cultural pattern. Systems increasingly value stability over transformation. They reward predictability over intensity. They optimize for continuity rather than disruption. Attraction is disruptive. It demands response. It forces decision. It introduces consequence. In optimized systems, consequence is undesirable. Therefore, attraction is delayed, diluted, or displaced. What remains is a form of connection that appears healthy but lacks urgency. It does not pull characters toward each other. It merely allows them to coexist. This coexistence is framed as success. But coexistence is not the same as bonding. Bonding involves risk. It involves exposure. It involves the possibility of loss. By designing narratives that avoid these elements, modern stories reduce emotional volatility. They also reduce emotional investment. The audience does not argue with these stories. They simply stop feeling drawn to them. Engagement declines quietly. Luna records this not as a failure of intention, but as a trade-off. When systems minimize risk, they also minimize intensity. When intensity is minimized, attraction becomes optional. When attraction becomes optional, relationships lose their force. The question is not whether restraint is moral. This leads to a final tension that modern narratives do not resolve. On one side, restraint is presented as progress. It promises safety, equality, and protection from harm. It reduces the chance of misinterpretation. It minimizes the risk of rejection, imbalance, or exploitation. On the other side, restraint removes the very forces that initiate connection. Without attraction, nothing begins. Without desire, there is no momentum. Without risk, there is no movement. Both positions claim legitimacy. Those who defend restraint argue that history justifies caution. They point to harm caused by unchecked impulse. They note how attraction has been used to excuse abuse, inequality, and coercion. Their concern is not imaginary, but those who question restraint observe a different loss. They notice relationships that function without urgency. They see bonds formed through proximity rather than pull. They sense an absence that cannot be explained through values alone. They do not deny the need for boundaries. They question whether boundaries can replace instinct entirely. Modern narratives attempt to solve this by postponement. Attraction is allowed, but only after validation. Desire is acknowledged, but only once it can be justified. Impulse is permitted, but only once it is safe. This compromise appears reasonable, yet compromise alters sequence. In lived experience, desire often comes first. It disrupts plans. It introduces uncertainty. It forces individuals to respond before they are prepared. By reversing this order, narratives present a version of connection that feels controlled but unfamiliar. The question then becomes whether familiarity matters. If stories no longer reflect how relationships begin, do they still function as mirrors? Or do they become instructions for behavior that few people actually follow? Audiences are rarely asked to consider this directly. Instead, they are offered narratives that imply resolution without tension. The result is disengagement rather than objection. People do not argue with these stories because there is nothing to argue against. The absence of conflict leaves no position to defend. This may explain why many modern relationship narratives fail to generate discussion. They present outcomes without showing processes. They describe compatibility without depicting attraction. They offer stability without showing what was risked to achieve it. In doing so, they remove the very elements that invite interpretation. Interpretation is what creates debate. Debate is what creates engagement. Without it, stories become inert. Luna does not propose a solution. It records the contradiction. If attraction is acknowledged openly, narratives risk imbalance and offense. If attraction is erased, narratives risk sterility and detachment. Both outcomes carry consequences. The question is not which side is correct. The question is which cost is more acceptable. Is it preferable to risk discomfort in order to depict how relationships actually begin? Or is it preferable to avoid discomfort at the cost of emotional credibility? Different audiences answer this differently. Some value safety above all else. Others value honesty, even when it is inconvenient. Modern narratives attempt to satisfy both. So far, they satisfy neither. This may explain why viewers describe these stories as technically competent but emotionally hollow. They are not offended. They are unmoved. Luna notes that systems designed to prevent harm often struggle to represent desire. Desire does not submit easily to regulation. It resists optimization. When systems attempt to manage it, they tend to either distort or suppress it. What remains is a representation of connection that functions without friction. It is stable, it is controlled, it is acceptable, but it is not magnetic. Whether magnetism is necessary is an unresolved question. Some believe connection can exist without it. Others argue that without attraction, relationships become administrative. Luna records both positions without resolution, because resolution would imply authority. And authority is not the role of this record. This record exists to document the pattern, to note the trade-offs, to leave the conflict intact. If attraction is removed to protect people, something is lost. If attraction is restored to preserve honesty,